February, and recently you're not gonna be doing anything out there.
Yeah.
Bonnie would go out there, and Judy's not gonna go out there.
I didn't figure another 2 weeks,
No,
cause I wouldn't go out there either.
I will tell you, not speaking for me.
Well, I'm glad, I mean, yeah.
In fact, it was nice to make the effort and then agree in two.
I can't imagine anybody would oppose. You may. No, I wouldn't be. Nobody around there is opposed to it.
These developers are smart though. Based on their situation, they know, especially the ones who do a lot of development, they know and understand the
Because they always call it.
which is where your CRA comes in.
Well, I'm glad when he said that he was gonna have the
Yes, well,
extra
that
meeting.
makes sense to me, but when it come to that bond and the
Oh,
interest.
because don't get a lot of that needed.
It's more like a normal loan. So speaking of loan.
That'd be a good
funds,
project.
development
I'd like to see that whole strip.
One house is completed and sold, and they're building the sixth one right now.
They built a 6 house out there right now.
Okay.
It's slow.
Yeah.
It's a little slow than you would have hoped. Definitely moving along, and a couple lots he's sold.
Well,
Four numbers?
Fine number.
My numbers? Oh, man, I needed you.
Yeah. I'd rather give it to you to spend to get it closer to us.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
No, what we're doing is good.
Next project.
All right, everybody, let's get on with, thanks, Rob, have a good night. Yep, bye-bye. Well, next time I'll order pizza. But we gotta wait till Ed's here so we can have extra green peppers.
Yeah, let's not go down to pizza thing.
Yeah,
You could have had dessert.
that's true. Oh, yeah, we could have just taken from the last meeting, yeah, okay. Okay, well, tonight, our second presentation is gonna be very exciting. It's talking about missing middle housing, and it's by our own Judy Clark, who's the head of planning here. So, Judy, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I'm just going to take an opportunity to talk about a legislative bill that was passed in 2020, and it's LB 866. It's called Municipal Density and Missing Middle Housing Act. So this is one of those acts that we don't really have a choice to say yes or no, we want to do this or we don't want to do this, because technically we're doing it. So it's not one of these, it doesn't have permissive language in the code. It says you shall. And from what I've been told by attorneys, when it says you shall, you shall. You have no choice. So that's what we're going to talk about is missing middle. So when you look at missing middle housing, this is what we're looking at, is this middle section of here that's kind of called out. Duplex housing, fourplex, courtyard, cottage courts, townhouses, multiplex, triplex, live-work units, those types of things. So, LB 866, the new requirements have been imposed on, basically on the city and staff. And at the very least, we have to prepare appropriate reports to submit to the legislation in July of this year. So we don't have a lot of time. There's some key thoughts behind this legislation, and these key thoughts are not my key thoughts, they're key thoughts coming from the legislative bill when I read it. So this is the legislators who introduced this. There's a need for affordable housing. This is one of the things that they have said in municipalities of all sizes in Nebraska. Affordable housing contributes to economic growth, and we've heard this a lot. You gotta have houses in order to have economic growth. Zoning restrictions, there's been a historic practice of what they call redlining in Nebraska communities. Redlining meaning, you can look at our zoning map in the back of this room. We've got a yellow area, that is R1 zoning. The only thing allowed in R1 is single-family detached housing. That's what they're saying redlining, because you're not allowing any other types of housing in that area through your zoning code. And it says that these redlining has contributed to the lack of affordable housing. Housing stock that they call missing middle housing has been largely missing since about the mid-1940s. So one of the things that they are forcing us to do or asking us to do is examine and update municipal codes so that we can have greater availability of affordable housing, increase residential density, promote efficient and effective land use, create conditions for successful mass transit, bikeability, walkability, affordability, those types of things. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about different types of middle housing, or what they call the missing middle housing. We're talking about duplexes, triplexes. I tried to make it a little fun so it wasn't quite so boring. Quadplexes, cottage clusters, townhouses, and then workforce housing. Mike talked a little bit about workforce housing, but workforce housing includes all of this, all of these things, which meets the needs of working families. They have a appraised value of 125, but not more than 275,000. Owner-occupied units, upper story housing, and housing that doesn't receive a lot of your federal funding sources. Just some of those other housing there, but it's middle housing. So here's where we get into what the requirements are. And again, I guess we do have a choice. I don't want to say we don't have a choice, but if we don't take the initiative to do something, they force us to do something. So we either do it on our own, or we end up with being forced to do something. And when I'm saying they, state legislature. So on or before July 1st, 2021, and every 2 years after that, each city has to submit a report to the Urban Affairs Committee. This report is not, hey, this is Judy Clark, I'm submitting a report that says we're good, we have good housing. No, it has all of this criteria in it. We have to do an overview of our current city zoning regulations. We have to show the percentage of the areas in the city that are zoned for residential use that allows construction. Now, my interpretation of this, and I think some others' interpretation of this, is the same, and then you may have a different interpretation. But when they say allowed, it would be what we call allowed by right. That means you come in, you get a building permit, you build your house, you build your duplex, you build your triplex. We allow, like in the R1 district, we don't allow anything other than single-family homes. So that is where the red line is. That is where we're not allowing it by right. Now, in an R2 district, you can do a duplex, but if you do anything above a duplex, you have to get a conditional use. That's not allowed by right. That's allowed by going through red tape, trying to get something like that. So the interpretation here that I've taken when I've started working on this document is, what do we allow by right, and what do we allow through jumping through the hoops, and where are we at with that percentage? We have to have a breakdown of new and residential construction, and specifically what we've constructed for single-family, multifamily, or middle housing. And again, middle housing are all of those others, estimates of costs. If our city codes provide for density bonuses or concessions or incentives. If they don't, we have to figure out something to put in there for concessions or incentives. If zoning codes allow for accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units, they refer to them a lot as ADUs, accessory dwelling units, ADUs. And those would be things, those of you who had been on planning commission before, as mother-in-law's quarters. That's what we consider mother-in-law's quarters. Again, our R1 district doesn't allow those. Other districts do allow ADUs. What incentives do we have as a community, or that we give relief to promote these types of housing? And then progress of what we're doing to make it to this ultimate affordable housing action plan that we have to adopt by 2024. Now, the good thing about, and then we may be called to go to the Urban Affairs Committee and present our report. So,
Judy, could I ask you a quick question before
Sure.
we jump off this page? In terms of density bonuses, would an example of that be something like, if you build a park on the corner of your subdivision, we're going to give you higher density? Is that what they're talking about with density bonus, or an outdoor area, or what's an example of a density bonus?
So from what I've seen with density bonuses is you're going to give people maybe some, planned unit development would maybe be a good example of a density bonus. So they can vary from some of your setbacks, some of your regulations, those types of things to try and increase, you can do smaller size lots in this area so you can get more housing units in this one area. That's what I would think of when I think of a density bonus type incentive.
Okay.
I would just add, I think, looking at that language, there appears to be, it's incentive-based, and so it would seem to me that you would want high-density housing, so apartment complex-type housing in the mix too, and then, in my mind, you would receive some sort of bonus for building that type of housing.
And you can do a lot of different things too. I mean, you can do like some sort of a tax incentive, some sort of to
Okay.
encourage that density,
Okay,
that
I'm with you.
increased density.
thank you.
Judy, also, do we know the percentages that they're wanting us to achieve for these different areas? So say like, for example, if for lack of another example, if the mall area gets approved and everything goes down and we turn that into a PUD, does that allow us to have maybe a little more R1 dwelling size, dwelling percentage? And are there percentages? Is it 40% R1? Is it 30% R2? Where are they? Do we know the parameters we have to meet?
No. After the 20 times I've read this legislation, I never once saw anything that gave us actually a directive as to what you are supposed to be at, or the ultimate goal. The only ultimate goal that we have is you're gonna do an affordable action plan, an affordable housing action plan, and you're gonna tell us what your goals are of where you wanna be.
So it's hard. We create our own rules maybe, and maybe they'll go with it.
That's the hope.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
write up something that sounds good and.
Right.
Yes.
And
Oh, we can't say
honestly,
that to the lawyer.
Let me just state that there is always opportunity when specifics are not present.
Well, Judy, then if having an R1 is redlining, are all the residential zoning's gonna go away and we would just have R? And
And-
all of these could be built everywhere?
if we choose to not take action and do something with our zoning code, then yes, that would be what would
Well,
ultimately
yeah,
happen.
I couldn't see where else it could go.
We have, and the very last slide will kind of tell you that, but we have the ability to adjust some things, to put rules and regulations on siting, put rules and regulations on what they have to look like if they're in a certain area, those types of things. As long as it doesn't, and I don't know the language exactly, I don't have it in front of me, but as long as it doesn't preclude people from building them, so we can't make our restrictions so tough that it's gonna preclude somebody from building it. Right now, our R1 district is too tough because it would preclude somebody from building a duplex in that area, or a triplex or anything else. So that one is gonna be a sample of being too restrictive. Now, does that mean we have to open that up and let, duplexes and triplexes and everything in that area? Not necessarily. We can choose how we do that or put criteria. Did I
Okay.
explain that well enough?
So kind of like you could transition from one R to another. I mean, R1, on the borders of R1, you could kind of transition into like an R2 or whatever, multi.
Kind of.
It wouldn't have to
sort
be a
of-
direct line and say this is here and this is here.
That's sort of what we have right now, so we've gotta kind of smooth those lines out a little bit, if that makes sense. Yes.
What I've understood so far in this legislation, I want to see if this is right, that this is separate of private covenants, right? So I think people lose sight with this, that a private developer can still put whatever covenants that are legal they want on a property and keep control of what goes on in that new subdivision. So this takes away some of that at the city level, but the developer still has every right to do that privately.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So if they build out by the interstate and they want all the houses to be 1,400 square feet or bigger, they can
Right.
put that in their subdivision, and that's outside of us.
But we
Outside
would
the
not
city
enforce that. So if
Right.
somebody came into me and wanted to
Outside the
pull a
city
permit
limits.
for a
It's not just-
1,200
No, in
square
the
foot in
limits.
that area, we would not tell them no, because their covenants is their deal, not ours.
The
So
piece,
let-
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So wouldn't that be a kind of a way around all this?
Somewhat, I don't know that you're gonna have developers that are gonna wanna enforce that, because enforcing covenants depends on how tough your homeowners association is.
I know.
And I don't see that you're gonna have a lot of people want to do that, but yes, it could be a way around it.
Judy, with this legislation, could you have a situation where, say, there was a block in the middle of, all residential area, and somebody'd say go in and demolish all the houses and then put up a big apartment complex? Are they gonna be able to do something like that?
If we choose to ignore it, yes.
Yeah, that's scary.
But if we choose to look through our regulations and amend some of it so that we can kind of gradually move into some of these other types of housing units, then no. But if we choose to do nothing and just say, ignore it, then what you said, yes.
So this doesn't cover just undeveloped land, it could go in and you could take where a solid R1 district and essentially force a apartment in.
Yes. But that is if we don't do something to control it. If we don't follow their guidelines and do an affordable housing action plan, if we don't do their reporting, then yes. But if we do what they're asking us to do, then we can work a little bit towards citing things, requiring certain things. When it comes to size of lots, what can go on there, what it has to look like, maybe it's a duplex, but the duplex, according to our code, says you have to have 1,200 square feet on each side or something like that, instead of getting these really tiny little duplexes right smack dab in the middle of a, area that has 3,000 square foot homes.
So the piece that kind of concerns me is not just the zoning issues, but we have to actively incentivize this, and what does that mean, and what does that look like? And that's my concern, more
Yeah.
than the zoning issues.
The one thing I do like about it is we are a small enough community that we're gonna have a couple of communities that are gonna have to put forward their affordable housing action plan, a year prior to us having to submit ours. So we will have a sample of what they're doing, and we can take a look at that and see if that's something, so we don't have to just invent the whole wheel all by ourselves. We can kind of take a look and see what some of the other communities are doing before we actually have to get our deadline in. But it is gonna take some work from Planning Commission and City Council as far as looking at some of these zoning codes and actually having an open mind when you get into some of these areas of town that, they don't wanna see that duplex. Well, let's have an open mind as to what type of a duplex could we potentially put in there that would fit the neighborhood.
So I think one way to potentially provide that incentive that you're talking about is to recommend what the houses or the living dwellings is probably the right word, look like in a certain area. And some of us watched a webinar a month or so ago, and League of Municipalities did, and there's an example, and where was that? It's somewhere near Omaha, wasn't it?
Papillion.
Papillion, yeah. And so what they did is they had kind of a mix of what were very nice looking apartments. I mean, they were done well on the outside. And then they had a series of, I would say they were maybe fourplexes in buildings that looked more like a normal house that were behind it. And it was one big area, all kind of decorated the same. It looked very nice. I mean, I like to have a yard. I wouldn't go live there. But for people that didn't want to live in that environment, it would be pretty nice. I mean, it was something that, it looked nice enough, I thought, it's too bad we can't talk to the people that are developing out there on A Street and say, could you make it look like this? Because it really looks nice. The folks that live in, 5,000 square foot houses are probably still not gonna love that being their neighbors. But it's gonna be much better than two townhouses stuck together being their neighbors. So I think if we really just focus on how it looks and what the population, and we can adjust the size of the streets and the setbacks and things, and you can use those to match those incentives for the developers. So instead of having to have a 36-foot wide street through the middle of it, we can adjust it down to 20, and then you reduce the speed and do all that thing so it's safe for those that work there. And those kinds of things can evolve into those incentives instead of laying money on the table.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
I guess, Judy, at some point in time, can you give us some history about how this bill even got introduced, how it got passed, who supported it, and what is the purpose of all of it?
It's all about affordable housing. I'm not sure why they came up with the idea, Ty. You may have a better understanding than I do with that.
I can give you a little background on it. The Nebraska Bankers assembled a task force on housing that I spent a couple years working on. It's been a few years ago now. Let's go back to Dixie and Phillip is a perfect example. That was a fairly controversial project because there were several neighbors that were upset about going to an R2 there because they wanted a higher density, which was allowed in R2 but not R1. Well, if you're the people that live around it, what's your downside of fighting it? You know, okay, I don't like duplexes or I don't like smaller houses. Well, I'm just gonna fight it and we're gonna assemble the neighborhood and we're gonna fight this tooth and nail. Well, why not? I mean, if they're not trying to sell houses or they don't work in construction, what's their real downside? Okay, so what's been determined out there is that you don't have to have that good a reason to fight having higher density near your home. And so this legislation was really introduced to try to get cities to help curve the situation, I think, a little bit we had at Dixie and Phillip, which was, I'm just gonna fight it because I don't want that across the street from me. Well, you know, we gotta have housing somewhere. And you know, I mean, we could argue about that project all night long, but I think that is a little bit of an example of what this legislation was about, and it was about getting cities to nobody wants to approve density as a resident unless you are an employer or you work in construction. What's your upside of approving higher density? But the fact of the matter, unless you just believe in housing, or you want your son to have a house to buy or whatever, but there's just too much built-in incentive for people to fight it, I think. And so this legislation was intended to get the cities to take a leadership role in curbing that.
And I think they want to make sure, like, your conditional uses, so there's, in larger cities, you'll see a lot of what we call the mother-in-law's quarters or the accessory dwelling units, and they're becoming more and more popular because that way mom, dad, the kids can live in the house behind, mom and dad can live in the house, and they can share, you know, utilities or share the site and things like that. We only do that as conditional use. So when you do that, you know, it's just like any other conditional use. You send out letters to the neighbors, everybody comes in, and again, why are they fighting that? It's probably a great area, it's probably a good thing. You know, you have two houses on one lot. Is that really a huge deal? Well, then you know, get everybody here, fill the council chambers because they feel like it is a huge deal. So I think a lot of that red tape is what they're trying to kind of bypass.
So if a person wanted to, they could buy 2 or 3 lots, put up a house on all of this and have all this big space regardless of what
Oh, yeah.
was zoned.
If you want to buy your neighbor's lot and your other neighbor's lot, yeah, definitely.
I think you're bringing up the perfect point that gets lost in some of this is that people can still buy land and do what they want with it within the city's realm or within the rules of what you can do. And if you want to buy a lot next to you or across the street and leave it vacant, I think we're at a funny size of community because we're a little small for common HOAs and covenants, but we're a little big not to have them. And so if you get in the communities larger than us, most of the new subdivisions have covenants, and so then people buy houses there and they're getting the protections of that neighborhood, which are privately established. And so I think we sit a little bit in no man's land because an HOA is viewed as kind of negative here, like at the bank if we have somebody shopping for a house, oh gosh, that's in an HOA, I got to pay fees, what am I going to get out of it? But if you get in the larger communities, they see it as that protects me from if I don't want a fourplex right next to me, that's the protection I have. So we kind of sit in no man's land a little bit as a community, I think, size-wise.
My experience with an HOA here in town was that there's no enforcement. You know, the homeowners, unless you get an attorney and get an injunction against something, that, I mean, and who's gonna pay that? So it wasn't something I would buy into again if I had a choice.
Just one point from the legislation is that if we provide the report to the legislature as of July this year, I believe, then step 2 is outlined as goals for a percentage of areas in the city zone for residential use which permit the construction of multifamily housing and middle housing. So I don't read that as it has to be in every R zone. We just have to determine what percentage of R zones we would allow them in, is my interpretation. So I don't think this has to be citywide as a point of clarification.
So you think we have some leeway, I mean, some discretion on how to,
I think so.
Absolutely. It's the worst-case scenario that Jim described. happens only if a city fails to adopt an affordable housing action plan and submit it to the state. Then then it's wide open. So the penalty for not complying is, watch out, you can do the situation Jim described, put multiplex in it. And what's the other word?
Well, I think if we can come up with enough paperwork and just flood it in there, they'll leave us alone.
Well, I think that sorry, Brad, one thing to consider is that there truly is opportunity in almost every change. So, right now, we're kind of looking at this as, I don't want to say restrictive is probably too strong of a word, but we should probably be considering how do we use this to the advantage of our town and our citizens. And that would be the application, I would suggest. It may take some heavy thinking, it may take a couple difficult discussions, but let's be honest, we have some areas in this community that need improvement in housing, so let's figure out how to use this scenario to help us with that.
And I think that's what they're trying to do by requiring us to give that report now and then requiring us, where Matt had kind of skipped forward to this goals section, which was the next step, which is going to the Affordable Housing Action Plan. So once we get our, here's our report, here's where we're at today, then we have to sit down and figure out what our goals are going to be for that Affordable Housing Action Plan, which we have 3 years to do. So we can do that from now until January 1, 2024. So by December of 2023, we've got to have an Affordable Housing Action Plan in place. So I think that's where you come in, like Matt said, like the mayor said, that's where you come in with, okay, here's our ideas of what we're going to do to make this Affordable Housing Action Plan work for us.
So there was a date of July 1st of this year.
Yes.
Is that just to admit that we're going to do something and then we have till
Well, we have to
2023,
submit a report. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over top of you. But we have to submit a report that tells them where we are now. What are our zoning codes like? Which areas allow for middle housing? Which areas don't allow for middle housing? What are percentages of middle housing? How people go about doing that, where we're at with building, and are we building single family, multiple family, apartment complexes, those types of things. All of that is due in July. So once they get that, then we start working on our Affordable Housing Action Plan. So once we get that put together, we'll know exactly where we are today, which I think is going to help us go into where we want to be.
So that's establishing a baseline at the state
For
level,
state,
so they can tell how much we've changed, or plan to change, excuse me.
Plan.
Yeah. So then this slide was just basically all about the goals that we have to do on our Affordable Housing Action Plan. Basically, again, it goes back to the percentage that Matt talked about, back to, where are you going to do it? Where's your density bonuses? Where's your geographic location? How are you going to do this? What are you going to do to incentivize? And again, incentives can be, not necessarily giving them money, but giving them some options. And then this is where we get to the part that Terry was talking about, is if we fail to do something, then yes, we're going to end up in that worst-case scenario like Jim Nisley said, where we just basically said, okay, go ahead and build whatever, wherever. And so we really don't, I would hope we wouldn't want to be in that situation. And this just talks about, if you don't do anything, you have to allow it in all areas that are zoned for single family, and you have to allow duplexes in all areas that are zoned for single family, and you have to amend any and all of your codes that are going to prohibit that. And then, again, we've talked about this already too. It doesn't prohibit us from regulating siding, design. We just can't make it so prohibitive that it's going to prohibit the building of missing middle housing. And then here's some pictures I just kind of got of what you can do as far as regulating what things look like. So the one on the left is a fourplex, actually. So you've got the two here and the two over here. The one in the blue is a duplex. This one is actually an eightplex. And so you can make them look super, super nice, depending on what we end up with as doing it. So basically, the next steps is going to be preparing that report, which I've got a little bit of a start on, but have till July to get it done. And then we'll work on trying to prepare an affordable housing action plan. And I'm not waiting till January of 2023 to see everybody else's, but I'm definitely going to look and see what some of the larger cities have done with affordable housing action plans.
So are they posted somewhere where you can access?
The city of Lincoln has an affordable housing action plan that they have already done, so they're kind of a step ahead. Maybe they had some insight, I don't know, or maybe that's just something they do every year. Theirs is like a 74-page document. It was done by a consultant. Now, I'm not sure that that's what we want to do, if we just want to do our own for the first stab at it, or how we're going to go about doing that, but that's something for administration to decide, and, you know.
So, but I mean, like other towns, I mean, will everyone be able to see ours?
Probably in the
When it's
end,
submitted?
yeah.
To submit it, I would assume it's public record.
We'll
Yeah.
probably end up having it on the website, would be my guess. I'm deferring to administration, but, I mean, yeah. We'll do it, we'll put it out there, and, yeah. And I'm sure, when it says staff prepares the affordable housing action plan, so right now it's me, so I'm probably gonna be reaching out for some help, because I don't think it's a one-person job with all the ideas that we have to do. We're gonna have to get some thoughts from everybody, people in the city, probably community members, to see where we go with that. So, any more questions I can try and fumble through?
I think really the biggest takeaway of this is we know this is coming down the pike. We're going to be proactive with it. We just have to keep an open mind and make sure that we play by the rules and show improvement in our areas. So like Brandon said, I don't think it's a bad thing. We just have to change our thinking just a skosh, possibly, and get a little creative. So.
Yeah, some of those pictures looked, I mean, like the duplex, if you didn't see the two doors, looks like a house. The eightplex looks like a great big mansion.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good thing. I would hope we could do it in-house, studying other people's and gleaning their ideas, and if you get enough people,
So we get to
I
keep.
think,
our
as the
record.
mayor would say, we would come up with a plan that everybody would copy, because it would be the best.
There you go, that's positive thinking, Mark.
And I mean that sincerely.
Thank you. And I do have a book that someone, I think from the League of Municipalities, sent me, and it's got lots of examples of things you can do with this type of housing and drawings and stuff, and I'll put that in the mayor's office tomorrow, so if anybody wants to swing by and look at it, you're welcome to borrow it for a day or two or whatever, and I would imagine they're not very expensive on Amazon if you decide it's something that you love, but,
The one from Daniel Paralek, is that who it is?
I don't remember, it's got a yellow cover.
Yeah, that's what it is.
okay.
Missing middle housing, thinking big and building small is what it's called.
You know, there's a lot of free market spirits in this room, and this stuff doesn't worry me that much, because whatever gets built has to get sold or rented,
Yeah. that's
right?
Yep.
And the only people that are gonna build it are people that can sell or rent it
Yeah.
on the back end, and we're not paying for it, they are, other than they might get TIF or something to help with some infrastructure, and so I think a lot of this, I mean, I think they're just looking a lot for the city just to try to embrace some of these higher density zonings and that, but I can't imagine a developer wanting to come into town and build something ugly, because they're gonna, it's not gonna save them that much money, I mean, they gotta be able to rent it, and so.
Supply and demand.
Yeah, and so this doesn't make me as nervous, because I think the housing supply and demand dynamics take away a lot of the risk of people doing things that the market doesn't want, but,
Yeah.
And we're required to do it, so we're not the bad guy.
right,
Yeah, we don't want the state coming in
Yeah, we don't
Unless
want
we-
that.
deciding for
Unless
us.
we want Terry to
Agree with
go
that.
defend us.
Thank you, Judy, we appreciate it very much.
Betcha.
Glad to know it's coming down the pike.
And thank you for not
Yeah, you
going
ready
an
to put
hour
your
and
house
a
on
half.
the market again? You ready to move again?
No.
Come on.
I don't think I can talk that long.
Pete, we need some more business. My
Okay,
finger
well,
wants more business.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here tonight. Like I said, we'll have another one of these in March where we'll cover some different issues. And we'll definitely have that agenda out well before the meeting, of course, but agenda, or the issues are a little bit up in the air, other than that we will try to get Mr. Groney here to tell us about micro TIF. But as the legislature is in session, I can't speak for his schedule. So, but he has offered to come and talk to us, so I'll see if I can get him here. So, okay, thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Well, Terry went to Vegas, didn't he?
He didn't tell me.
I think, I don't know that for sure. I heard